My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
My name's Freya Robertson, and today's leadership quotes. The first one is from Jurgen Klopp, who's the Liverpool manager. Everything in life is about relationships. Otherwise, you'd live alone in the mountains and only be responsible for the things that you do. Always, when you enter a room, you have responsibility for the mood in that room. The second quote is by Daniel Goleman. Leadership is not domination, but the art of persuading people to work towards a common goal.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
The Leader Assistant podcast is brought to you by Goody. If you send business gifts to employees, clients, or sales prospects, Goody is a game changer. You can send one gift or hundreds at a time without ever worrying about shipping details. With Goody, your gift recipients provide all their shipping info, and they can even swap out your gift for another option if they prefer. It's free to start gifting, and you can get a $20 credit when you sign up. Oh, and if you mention you heard about Goody from the Leader Assistant podcast, Goody will add an extra $10 credit to your account. So go to leaderassistant.com/Goody, that's GOODY, to start gifting today. Again, that's leaderassistant.com/Goody. Hey friends, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and I'm very excited. You're welcome to episode 156. Today I'm going to be speaking with Freya Robertson, who's the executive assistant to the CEO at Progeny. Freya, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, what part of the world are you from, and where do you currently live?
So I am from England, and it is 11 o'clock here, so I'm highly caffeinated, but I am from a county called Yorkshire, or specifically North Yorkshire, and I live in a place called Harrogate, so very scenic, very picturesque, but I work in the city of Leeds. Okay.
And I read on your LinkedIn profile that you completed the London Marathon a few years ago. What made you have the crazy idea to run a marathon, and what did you learn about yourself and the experience?
So I've always been a runner. It was what I always say to my other half, it's one of those sports that when you're growing up, it was the lesser cool sport. So I was like, oh God. But anyways, I've always been a runner. I've done the Great North Run, which is a sort of big half marathon here, a couple of times. And I had always thought I wanted to do a marathon because it was a challenge. I like to sort of take myself out of my comfort zone. But I obviously did the London Marathon in 2017. I'd recently lost my granddad to motor neurones disease, which was, to anyone who's ever witnessed either someone who's been through that or has lost someone, it's quite a traumatic and a very rapid disease. So it was at the perfect time to take myself out of the comfort zone, run a marathon, and also do it for a really good cause. So I decided, my granddad used to watch me at school doing different sports and plays, so he was a big supporter of all of that, so I thought it was the perfect opportunity, and I set out on running the London Marathon. I had no idea how brutal it was going to be, and you see them on the television, and they make it look amazing, and the experience running the event itself was incredible. The adrenaline gets you through, the supporters get you through, but the training is brutal. On a Saturday night when you want to have a big dinner and a few glasses of wine, and then you've got the prospects of 17 miles the next day, it's hard, but especially through the winter months. But I learned a lot about my mindset through it all. I'm the type of person who, once I set myself a goal, that's it. Even if I had to drag myself over that finish line, I knew I was going to do it. But I also recognise through the process that I'm quite emotionally motivated. I need to have, as to quote someone like Simon Sinek, I need to have my why. And for me, with the marathon, obviously, my emotional why was for my granddad and for motor neurons, but also then the fact that I was going to challenge myself and do something different. And I think through stepping us out of your comfort zone is often when you learn the most about yourself. So I had some highs, I had some lows, but it was a massive challenge. And I would never say never to doing another one again, but not anytime soon.
Wow. Well, that's impressive.
Thank you.
Props to you. I can barely run a mile, let alone, was it 26 and a half or something like that? 27 and a half? 26
and a half miles. And the last 400 meters feel like forever. It is brutal.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, thanks for sharing. So let's talk about your career. So how did you end up as an assistant, and how long have you been one?
So officially, full-time, I've been an assistant since I was 21. So I've been an assistant for 6-7 years. But I actually did the PA role part-time in my summer when I was from the age of 17. So it's kind of the only role I've ever done. I've evolved from being an admin assistant to a team assistant to a personal assistant to now executive assistant to the CEO. It's not a recognised career path, and I actually don't think it's celebrated enough or put in front of people as young girls or boys at young ages don't often think I'm going to be a PA. So I'd seen on a TV program actually years ago with my mum, there was a celebrity figure, I can't remember who it was, and they had their PA on this program. And they were organising events, travelling with them, organising their schedule. And I can remember saying to my mum at the time, oh my God, I would love to be a PA. And at this point, I'd ruled out, well, I can't be a vet because I'm scared of needles. I can't be a pop star because I can't sing. And the PA role was just something that really interested me. And I did part-time. I worked for a local business. I was just supporting bits and pieces for her initially, and then I got more and more involved with different things as your relationship builds, the trust builds, and they start to give you more and more, which is what I loved about the role. No 2 days are the same. It's so varied, and you're working directly with people, and it's so focused on the relationship and the trust that you build, and then as a result, then the value you can bring. So I started that, then I went to university, and coming out of university, like most uni students, you have no idea what you're going to do. And I just thought, well, I loved being a PA. I'll go and continue being one. And I've never looked back. So Here I am. Yeah, I worked for a smaller business called Comply Direct, who were brilliant. It was a first full-time role. They were a very small team, so it was very all hands on deck. I supported the sales team, the marketing team, the HR team, got involved in a lot of different things. And then I moved to Leeds and I worked for a big corporate called Grant Thornton, who are international. That was my first sort of big corporate professional role, where I learned a lot of the skills that I still sort of have today. And then I've recently obviously moved in the past couple of years to Progeny, which is a completely different journey, but amazing. It was the perfect blend between the corporate business and the small-time business to support an entrepreneur. So, yeah, it's fantastic. I love it.
Awesome. So what does Progeny do?
So they're a financial services business the concept is to have all your advisors in one room. So if you've got any tax needs, financial planning needs, investment needs, legal needs, everybody sits under one roof and you get one joined up advice. But instead of being sort of a stuffy, old-fashioned financial services business, they're a lot more tech-led, innovative. It's set up by an entrepreneurial figure who just wants to sort of challenge the industry and challenge the norms. And I joined Progeny when they weren't quite startup or small, but they were in the early stages of their journey, and I saw that as a massive opportunity. He'd never had a PA before, so it was totally, and he actually initially didn't really want one, so I got to come in and totally make it my own. And I've obviously obviously absolutely loved being on the journey. And we were a 60 people business when I initially joined, and now there's 250 of us. So
Wow.
It's growing rapidly.
Wow. And how many years have you been there?
I've been there nearly 3 years, so not that long, but the growth is huge, which is, it's exciting, but that's what you get, I think, when you work with an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's totally different.
Never boring. Never boring.
No, never boring. Keeps me on my toes, or I'd probably keep him on his toes.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's see. How have your professional relationships impacted your career? So maybe networking or people that you've worked with throughout your career.
Well, I'm a big believer of, especially in this role, relationships are arguably one of the most important things, and they've hugely shaped my career in terms of, so some of the people I met when I worked at Grant Thornton, I'm still friends with today, but most notably at Progeny, there's the CPO, who's the Chief People Officer. She recruited me, and she probably knows me better than some of my friends do. As an assistant, you have a tendency, because you're always supporting other people, you have a tendency to sometimes forget about yourself, sometimes sort of put your development to the side, and it's all about, who you're supporting. In my instance, the CEO and the business. And she's very good at sort of championing me and helping me identify my strengths and my weaknesses, encouraging me to do things like this. And you need that support system and those people you trust around you. Also, the CEO, as I say, he didn't want a PA. So to have accepted the role and completely let me make it my own as much as he has, trust, we've got a really great relationship, trust one another. I get involved in things that I never thought I would, and I have for the first time ever, I have a voice in the business, so I'm treated like another member of the SLT or the board, and I'm allowed to comment on things. I think you have a very unique role or perspective as an assistant. You see things you're not aligned to one department. You kind of see things completely differently, or you see things objectively. You've got an eye on everyone and everything. And at Progeny, that's massively celebrated. So the people and the relationships are so important to where I am today.
So how did you said he didn't really want a PA or EA. I've talked to actually a handful of assistants, even in the last week or two, that are like, I can't get my executive to meet with me or to use my skills, and I just can't seem to get them to. They've never had an assistant before, and So how did you jump in and say, all right, this is how we're going to do things?
So I think a certain degree of emotional intelligence, which I know we'll touch on later, but you have to read. There are definitely times when he doesn't want me to sit and badger him with questions or scheduling things, or you have to pick your moment. And I think it was little things at first, and little things that made a big difference. So just before, when his diary had no detail in it, everything was in his head. And I can remember looking at his diary and like, how does anyone know where he is? So the fact that everything was in his diary and someone was taking all that pressure off him, which to me was so simple and the role is so much bigger than that, but it made a big difference. And quite quickly then we started to sort of build trust, and he started to not feel he had to ask me to do things. Things were just taken care of. And then I think slowly building the relationships outside of just for me and him. So building the relationships with the senior leadership team. I think he then realized the impact that the role had on not just me and him and his world, but also bridging the gap between him, who's always 5 steps ahead, visionary, strategic, tells you something and then thinks it's done, and the team beneath, and being that conduit between the two. And I think slowly, but because you build those relationships with the wider team, the trust is just there, and the trust is 100% the foundation for, I think, any EA or PA relationship, having that trusted relationship with the person you work directly with, but with that wider team, so that you can pull all the right people together in the right places, and also that you can lean on them and vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip on kind of whether it's being political or strategic, however you want to call it, but working with the leadership team and building strong connections and building trust with the leadership team. You know, even if your direct executive is a little bit hesitant and not sure what to do, like, you can kind of rally the troops and make an impact across the whole team. So
yeah, absolutely. And as I say, the CPO, so I remember sitting in my interview, and it was the CPO, Sam, and my boss, the CEO, and she was the biggest supporter of the role, had been trying to get him to have a PA or an EA for years, and then you had the CEO who absolutely did not want a PA. So the dynamic in the room was so funny. We all still sort of laugh and talk about it now. But even then, even through the interview, initially he was quite cold, and we had to really, both of us had to work to sort of engage him in the room. Ultimately, I'm going to be his PA, so I need to speak to him. But as the interview went on, as you ask the sort of the right questions, you read the room, it's starting to soften. And I can remember saying to my partner, this is either going to work and it will be amazing, or I'll be there a couple of weeks and he'll hate it. And thankfully it worked.
Nice. Well, that says a lot about your, leadership skills, and then just the fact that you had that experience, and you could come in and just hit the ground running. So let's talk about emotional intelligence. So in your mind, what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent?
It's a hard thing to define, but I think in my opinion, to be emotionally intelligent is someone who is in tune with their own emotions and their own thoughts and feelings, and is comfortable with that, so that therefore they can support others. I think in order to be able to read how to deal with a situation, you have to understand your own emotions first. So I think that is what it means to be emotionally intelligent. But I think there are certain people who naturally have a high degree of emotionally intelligence, and I do believe that a lot of assistants do, and I think a lot of great leaders do. But it doesn't mean if you don't naturally have it, you can never have it. I do think you can work on it, but some people just naturally have a high degree of emotional intelligence, can read a situation, know when to speak or when not to speak. And I think it's anyone who's quite comfortable in their own skin and quite comfortable with their own emotions, that they can channel them to support and assist others.
Yeah. So how do you kind of work on your own self-awareness and your own emotional, awareness?
I think through working with others, I think being around other people, you can reflect on there are certain people who you naturally feel more comfortable with, and there are certain people who you may less so, or that you have to alter either how you deliver something or who you are in a certain situation to get the best out of that situation or the best outcome. And I think that through that you become more aware of what the triggers are, that why is it that you gel more with one person than another? Is it the way that they engage with you? Is it the type of their body language? Is it that you start to recognize it in yourself? I think you have to look within first. And so the gentleman I quoted earlier is a gentleman called Daniel Goleman, who talks about the 5 characteristics of emotional intelligence being self-regulation, self-awareness, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And I think to be able to self-regulate yourself, you have to be self-aware. I think it all starts with self-awareness, because if you can't identify when either something's irritating you or you want to challenge something in a certain way, until you recognize that within, you can't then regulate it. You can't then decide, actually, no, this isn't the right time, or actually, no, I need to sort of calm down first, or I need to speak to this person. So I do think that emotional intelligence all stems from self-awareness, and you learn more and more about yourself through the relationships you have with others.
Yeah, that's well said. So what are some resources or maybe practical tactics, if you will, that you would recommend to those listening who want to improve their emotional intelligence?
Personally, there's been a lot of books. So Daniel Goleman is a great place to start. If you read his books, he breaks the fact that it's broken down into 5 quite easy characteristics. I think you talk about in a lot of in your book, and some of the podcasts with some of the people that you've interacted with all talk. Firstly, a lot of them have a high degree of emotional intelligence, but all talk about relationships and the importance of relationships. So I think there's a lot of content out there, but it's what works for you. And Daniel Goleman works for me because it's broken down really simply. But I think through listening to other people's experiences, how other people deal with situations, you can sort of learn and adapt. And I do think podcasts, listening to other PAs, listening to other EAs, as I say, it can be a lonely world. So listening to how other people deal with things and recognizing, oh, actually, I was in a similar situation. I could have altered how I behave slightly. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of podcasts, a lot of information. I think the more you want to learn and the more you want to develop, the better.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the shameless plug for my book as well.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, one of my favorite questions to ask my guests on the show is, what makes an assistant a leader?
So many things, but I think it's a unique role. It's a role that sits within an organizational chart or a leadership chart, but slightly sort of over here and on their own. And I think that has many it lends itself to having many leadership qualities. So firstly, a high degree of emotional intelligence. I think great leaders have emotional intelligence. I think the fact that any assistant has to pull different people from different departments to get either the overall business goal or solution, I think that in itself is a huge leadership skill, because you're not just working in silo to deliver one goal. You have to have the bigger picture because you're a reflection of the leader that you're supporting. And I think one of the most important things is an assistant is often an extension of, so for me, I'm an extension of the CEO, whether he's not in the room. I'm there to reflect his thoughts and feelings. You're the closest person to them. You're their sounding board, their trusted advisor. So it's the fact that you're acting almost as their double. So in many ways, you just naturally are a leader. And I think the power that presents and the value that can bring to businesses is being recognized a lot more, even in the changes of some of the titles. There's chiefs of staffs now. I know Google and Amazon call executive assistants executive business partners. I think it's sort of starting to really get the respect it deserves. But I think by the types of things that a lot of assistants have to do, it aligns massively to the qualities of a leader and someone who can pull people together and bring people together for the better of the company or for one strategic goal.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So when was that moment, or was there a moment or even a conversation with your CEO that he was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get the value that you bring, or I get that you're a leader, or was there a conversation? Was there a moment when he kind of was like, okay, went from that cold interview to?
That's a really good question. I think there probably was. I think that I remember actually a moment in a meeting. So coming from the background I was before, which was corporate, I was very used to being in meetings and taking minutes, and it was a lot more formal and structured. Thrown into a far faster paced entrepreneurial business, it was different, and it was a big learning curve, but it was amazing. I can remember sitting in a meeting room and my CEO turning to me and saying, "What do you think?" And at first I was like, And within a couple of weeks, that became really natural. I think that was probably the turning point where obviously he valued what I was doing in an assistant capacity, but also valued my opinion. And it lends itself to the point of in a leadership capacity. I wasn't just sat there to take minutes. I was sat there to have an opinion, and the value of the position that you're in, that you see things differently, was suddenly recognized. And it was a big sort of turning point in my career where I was like, yes, this is exactly it. I can see the value of the role and the relationship, and the fact that I'm being asked took a lot of confidence to start to feel like I could speak in those big sort of more senior forums. But once you start, there's no stopping me, there's no shutting me up.
I was going to say, once you get going, you're like, hey, you know what? Just give me that CEO hat and you go take a break and I'll take care of it.
Exactly. No.
You're like, maybe not that far.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you said you took minutes and did a lot of note, and it's a little different going from the kind of, corporate big world and then the fast-paced entrepreneur. So what tips do you have for assistants who are sitting in those meetings and trying to take all the minutes down and try to take notes? What are a couple quick tips on minute taking?
Practice makes perfect, 100%. And at first, I think any assistant writes every detail down, because you're so paranoid that you're not
something.
And you're not going to have captured the right thing. I think it comes with understanding, and I think it's okay to accept that you're not going to get it perfect the first time, and people might amend things. Don't take it personally. You're not going to come into a business and understand every acronym, every individual thing that the teams are talking about. So I used to come in and sit in some of the financial meetings and think, oh my goodness, they all spoke in acronyms, and I was like, what does any of this mean? And I'd have to go away. And it's okay to Google things. It is okay to ask people. It is okay to lean on others and say, do you mind just checking this section? Because you want to get it right. And I think allow yourself that period of settling in and understanding the business and speaking to the right people and checking things. And slowly, as your relationships build, you'll get what people want from the minutes. And usually the 55 pages of everything everyone said gets condensed into 2 pages, and it just becomes so natural. But I do think you've got to give yourself that grace period. You're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. No one is the perfect minute taker for every situation. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Well, thanks, Freya. It's been great chatting with you and getting to know you and your story. And I'm sure listeners are just excited to hear your tips and tricks. And how can people reach out and say hi if they want to connect with you?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out, I am on LinkedIn. I'm Freya Robertson, CEO of Progeny. So, CEO. EA to the CEO.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
You took the hat. You took the
Exactly.
CEO hat.
But if anyone wants to drop me a message or just reach out and send me a line, and absolutely, I think I'm a big supporter of different assistants across the world supporting one another. So if I can help, or if anyone wants to talk about anything, then feel free to reach out. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I will definitely put your LinkedIn profile URL in the show notes. And for those listening, you can find the show notes at leaderassistant.com/156, leaderassistant.com/156. Thanks again, Freya, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com